Interesting that Humza Yousaf has, in this past hour, expressed concern over this idea of using the general election as a de facto referendum on independence, saying that basically that was perhaps... I'm not wedded to the idea of using that. What I would say, let's stop talking about process and start talking about policy.
Yeah, so I think this is really, really interesting in that Nicola Sturgeon, who was within at least the SNP a very, very dominant figure, if not Scottish politics as a whole, managed to paper over some of those cracks within the SNP about where precisely to turn next when it comes to the independence movement, to the second referendum. The reason I say that is because, of course, there was meant to be this big meeting next month of the SNP to work out whether it was a good strategy to use the Westminster elections next year as a de facto referendum. Now, many in the party didn't like that. Many felt it was the only way forward, given the fact that the Supreme Court had shut down one avenue, and clearly the UK Parliament behind me is not going to open up another. But it is a sign of some of the tensions within the SNP. We know, too, there are concerns about the Gender Recognition Act. You talked there about Ash Regan. She is not terribly in favour of it. But also Kate Forbes, who is the Finance Secretary, is seen as someone who's socially conservative. He would also not be in favour of this, though a majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament did vote for. She, interestingly, was on maternity leave at the time, so did not have to take part in that vote. She's a notable character, though. She's only 32 years old, holds one of the most senior posts within government, but is seen as kind of part of this massive potential generational shift we're going to see now within the Scottish National Party, Mark, because two of the old guard have decided not to stand, not least of all John Swinney, who's the deputy leader, but also Angus Robinson, who of course used to lead the SNP here at Westminster. He's the Constitution Secretary. He tweeted saying that as a father of two very young children, the time is not right for me and my family to take on such a huge commitment. So what you're seeing is, yes, divisions about policy, and we're going to see that, I think, exposed even more as this race continues over the next month or so. It's not going to be until the end of March until we get a new name, until we get a new leader. But additionally, we're going to see this big generational shift, it seems, as well, with the kind of young guard who've been used to the SNP in government taking over, with some of the old guard, if you like, stepping back.
Yeah, and just to look at that dynamic, suggestions from Edinburgh that it may actually be sort of dividing into the young camp and Kate Forbes and a Stop Kate coalition in terms of the rump of what was the old Sturgeon party, if you like.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, though, has said today that she is not prepared to name who she wants to see as a successor in this process. But yes, there are divisions. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is undoubtedly seen as someone who is socially progressive, who is liberal in terms of her views around a whole range of social issues, who has taken the Scottish National Party, it must be said, on an effort to expand the role of the state in Scotland. Now, there's also a feeling Kate Forbes potentially might be slightly more right-wing in her politics. And clearly, when you've got this big discussion in Scottish politics about the independence question, some of these other big policy issues do take a back seat. But frankly, if there's going to be not just a change of leader, but a generational shift as well, and a shift in regards to policy areas, these divisions are going to be exposed up until March 27, when there is a new leader. And there are clearly different factions within that party, something Nicola Sturgeon, as I say, through the sheer force of her popularity, has managed to paper crack over. And I don't think we're going to find ourselves there over the next couple of weeks where those paper cracks, or that plaster, if you like, will hold. We have got, though, until the end of the week, so we might see some other names come forward, but I think we're starting to see, essentially, those battle lines now being drawn. What is interesting, though, beyond that, is the fact that it might have elsewhere here in the UK, in note that actually none of these names that have stepped forward thus far are names that most people in the rest of the UK would recognise, and that will have that will have an impact as well, because again, Nicola Sturgeon was a big personality and a big, massive politician, not just in Scotland but across the rest of the UK as well.
Yeah, and just to touch on one other perhaps unifying issue, and that is that so far, we'll obviously reflect on all voices here across Westminster, is that the gender recognition reform issue really is not being pursued by any of these candidates. They see it pretty much now as a footnote in Scottish political history.
Yeah, just to take you back a little bit, for those that don't know, of course, this was a bill that was passed in the Scottish Parliament. Then the UK government looked at it. Now, as always in the UK system, we have to remember this place behind me is supreme in our constitution, whether one likes it or not. They are devolved parliaments for a reason, both in Cardiff and Edinburgh and in Belfast as well. And so the UK government felt that it couldn't go ahead with that. It essentially struck down that bill, or would not allow it to enter into law. And there was a sense that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP wanted to use this almost as a test case, if you like, to try and argue that Westminster was yet again overruling the will of the Scottish people, in the sense that this gender recognition bill was passed by a majority in the Scottish Parliament, though polls would suggest the majority of Scottish people were not in favour of it. But given the fact that we had a whole row over it, and given the fact that actually it didn't get through the public test of public opinion, if you like, it does seem that the SNP decided it's all rather toxic. It's one of the reasons maybe Nicola Sturgeon stepped down. Let's step away from that issue entirely.
Darren, as ever at Westminster, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that. And of course, we'll update people with more as we get it from both Westminster and Edinburgh.